to Mindcrime Libertyshow with me, Swithin Dobson, and him, Tim Patton. Today we discuss assassination politics with Jim Bell. Jim, what is assassination politics?
It's an idea I came up with 25 years ago and turned it into an essay of that name. I started out thinking about how it would be possible for the people of 49 United States to get rid of one senator from one particular state who was well known for bringing back a lot of what they call pork barrel spending to his own state. That the idea would be that the people of 49 states would be better off if that particular politician woke up one day dead. But the problem is each individual person in those 49 states would probably only be willing to spend maybe 50 cents or $1 to see that particular guy dead. Well, no hitman is going to take up the contract for 50 cents or $1. The key, however, is there probably would be very many millions of people who would be willing to donate 50 cents each. So I decided it was an engineering problem to combine all those 50 cents and dollar donations and possibly a few larger to buy the, frankly, the death of the free spending politician. And I realized that that was an engineering problem. And by engineering, I mean computer engineering as of that era and this, and that there should be a way to accomplish that outcome. And I had read an article in Scientific American in August 1992, written by a cryptographer named David Friedman, who talked about how it was possible to use something called digital cash to do that kind of thing. Now, of course, that article was 18 years, 19, 20 years before Bitcoin came into existence. And as a consequence, that was more of a theoretical construct then than it is now. But of course, Bitcoin did eventually get written. And while I'm not saying Bitcoin could be used for an assassination politics system because it isn't exactly anonymous, it is an example of how people can pay each other, people who have never met and will never meet.
So how would the system work in practice? You mentioned in the article a particular way of doing it. Have you modified that at all, or in the way you think it could work? Could you just outline it for listeners mechanically? You kind of predict the death of a certain individual on a day and a time, and who do you predict it with? What's the broad mechanics? How does the system work?
Okay, the way I forecast it back in 1995 was the idea that someone would set up a website that would accept donations, and it would keep track of individual names as targets. It would all be anonymous. The person could make the donation without worrying about ever being identified. The money donated to see the death of some particular, at the time I was focusing primarily on politicians, would be added together and the amount totalized, and everybody in the world would have access to this information online. They would know how much money was being offered, and if any particular person wanted to potentially collect this money, they could make a prediction. They would associate their prediction with money that they themselves would spend, because if this is thought of as a lottery, you don't want people to be able to just randomly make predictions. So you require that people include some level of money. Might not be a lot, but it would be enough to keep the random guessers from randomly guessing. At some point, someone will be interested in enough in that pot of money to, if he wants to, make his own donation and make the outcome happen. He will then be able to access this money also anonymously. Nobody will know who actually collected the money. However, the system would be written in an intelligent fashion to ensure that all parties to this arrangement are reassured that the system plays fair. It plays fair. The person who made the prediction knows that if his prediction happens, he will in fact get the money. All donors to this system are reassured that the money will be paid only to the person who makes the correct prediction and not to anyone else. They will also be certain that they will not, that the money won't be taken away, won't be stolen by the people who potentially run the system. Now, I did a lot of speculation on how it would run. Since then, there's been some interesting developments in a system called Ethereum and Augur. It's spelled Augur, and Ethereum is spelled Ethereum. My original concept was that there would be a single computer system on which this thing would run. It would have to be somewhat secret because obviously you wouldn't want people to be able to shut it down. But what the Ethereum people did starting a few years back is set up a system that on which computer programs could run, but it would run on one computer. It would potentially run on thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of computers, or even millions of computers. It would not be possible to shut down such a system by taking out 1,000 different computers. There would be way more computers than they could possibly get rid of. Now, this is a fascinating development. I didn't think of it. I wish I had, but it currently runs today. And in fact, Augur is a system of predictions which potentially would be very similar to an assassination politics system, although for technical reasons, it currently isn't going to be used to buy assassinations. But yes, there are prediction markets that are running. No doubt there are prediction markets on who is going to win the upcoming American election. But the idea would be that instead of this program running at one specific secret computer, it would run on hundreds of thousands of perfectly innocuous computers around the world. So it will be protected against individual happenstance, accidents, or any other events that might try to stop the system.
With not having a single head, as you originally suggested, how would participants know that if they were to... How would you guarantee that the correct predictor is going to get the money? How would they be confident that if they did the correct prediction that they would actually get it when you can't... there's no sort of notifiable agency that you can look at and go, well, that's reputable or not, so that you can be confident that you'll receive the money?
Well, as you might imagine, that is a complicated system. My original idea described the idea that a person who made a prediction, let's say a person who wanted to potentially collect the pot of money, would put in a prediction and wrap it in, let's call it envelopes, encrypted envelopes, so that he would transmit it anonymously to the operation that runs the system. It would be published as an encrypted envelope. And that means that everybody else's system will be able to record that prediction. But at the time, it would be encrypted. So nobody would know what was being predicted, how much money was being sent, what date it was predicted to occur. There would be a lot of things that people wouldn't know. But their computers would record this all automatically. It would all be taken care of by computer technology. And when someday the prediction comes true, or even if it doesn't, but let's say the prediction comes true, an encryption key will show up that, when applied to this original prediction, would unlock it, and everybody would be able to read the prediction. And it would say that a particular person would die at a particular date, and the amount of digital cash associated with that prediction was a certain amount. This means that everybody knows that someone out there made the prediction potentially long before it actually occurred. And therefore, they're reasonably certain that the person who made the prediction is entitled to the money that has been collected. So even the people who run the operation, even the people who run this website or this web program, would not know who was predicting what until substantially after the event occurred. It is complicated. I should mention that I consider myself pretty good at technology, but I'm not a software person, and I've never been such. I never considered myself able to actually program this entire system. The key, of course, is there are people out there who are capable. Consider Satoshi, who invented the Bitcoin, and the people who invented this Ethereum and Augur program. Those are the kind of people that I knew and know now will be able to implement a system to do what I want it to do.
You have said it's inevitable. I actually would probably, in a way, agree in theory that it's in some ways inevitable. The rate of computing increases ceteris paribus every X number of years, whether or not there's a decline or any limit. So the technology may happen. But my first question is, wouldn't the current state just use it? You could argue the state assassinates people all the time, including the American state, the Russian state. If you look at the state engages in you don't even need to be a conspiracy. Not that I'm against conspiracy theories. There's a lot of there's elements within the state sometimes assassinate other elements of the states. Wouldn't the existing state just use it to assassinate dissidents or people that view it as a threat to its authority?
Okay, I'm glad you answered it, or you asked that question. We live in a society today where if you want to accomplish a political change, there have to be people who speak out loudly and argue in favor of a change. Well, those people become well known. You know who they are. In the kind of post-AP world that I'm anticipating, no one has to stand up and advocate for a particular change. No one has to identify himself as being in favor of that, let's call it a little revolution. The system, the state, as you say, if it doesn't know who the enemies are, it has no idea who to target. And the system that I'm anticipating would not be able to know who its enemies are. People could achieve, well, first off, even today, people can debate and discuss on a semi-anonymous fashion. There are a number of discussion areas on the internet. Potentially there are thousands of, I don't even know what the number is, but it's probably quite large. People who use those discussion areas don't have to identify themselves. They can log in and become a handle for a particular name. And if nobody knows who they are, and if their position is unpopular, nobody knows how to target them for their negative ideas. On the other hand, if their ideas are considered generally good, those ideas can be implemented without that person ever identifying himself. So the state, the system, can only target people it can identify. And the post-AP, I call it, system, nobody would have to stand up. Nobody would have to stick his neck out. Nobody would have to associate his name with a particular change in the way he thinks things should run. So as long as you think about that, and needless to say, I've thought about that for 25 years, generally speaking, I found that there's a solution to every initially anticipated problem. I suggest people read essays by two people, Robert Vroman, last name spelled Vroman, and that he wrote something, he debated with his, I think, business or academic partner back in 2002. And the person he debated with was Robert Murphy. Now, Murphy was against the AP idea, but a lot of that back then was probably the belief that, it would be too complicated to implement. Well, the advance of something called Tor and Bitcoin and good encryption should defeat that argument. There's another person who wrote a very interesting discussion related to the AP concept. His name was R. Sukumaran, and I don't know what the R stands for. He was an Indian, I don't know, maybe he was a jet fighter pilot, I'm not sure. I'll spell the name, Sukumaran. He wrote something about 2004, and if you do a Google search for assassination politics and then Sukumaran, you'll probably find his discussion. And those two by Vroman and Sukumaran address a lot of the issues that most people might initially raise when they discuss the idea. I should say that when I was writing the essay initially in January of 1995, I went through virtually every objection I could think of to the idea before I even wrote it down into a part one of the AP essay. I posted it onto a mailing list called Digital Liberty, run by a guy named Robert Frezza, Frezza, who had set up this discussion area to discuss use of technology to improve freedom, of which my assassination politics essay was appropriate, except it was a little bit too hot for him. He wasn't quite ready to jump into the pool, you might say. He wanted to just dip his toe in. Fortunately, someone who was aware of another mailing list called Cypherpunks wrote or copied a copy of that part one essay to Cypherpunks and informed me of the existence of Cypherpunks. I was not previously aware of the existence of the Cypherpunks list. So very shortly, I went over to the Cypherpunks list and began debating it over the next, at least over the next year. Unfortunately, almost a year ago, I discovered that the archives for the Cypherpunks list had actually been forged, faked, probably in the early 2000s period. So the 1995 archives, instead of having many, many thousands of articles or emails on the subject, actually ended up now only having like 4 or 5. It was a total fake job, and it's not clear who did it. But so, unfortunately, if you go as far as look for the cypherpunks list, the archives, you will not find the actual discussion that existed. However, there ought to be people out there, and I beseech anybody who has access to those his own archives, if he happens to have them on some old hard disk somewhere, please get in touch with me or other people, and we can make a copy of it and get the correct information back.
I've read the Murphy. I've read both of Murphy's criticism. It seems like Murphy has a mixture of pragmatic and moral objections to the argument. I mean, as far as the moral arguments he makes, I mean, in some ways, they in a way are neither here nor there, because it just becomes which is more dangerous, gangs, private gangs, or the state. The trouble there is that the state, in a way, is an very organized gang. If you take the sort of Murray Rothbard understanding of the anarcho-libertarian, even Noam Chomsky wouldn't balk at that. He just calls it a terrorist organization. So I remain skeptical of, you say, the post such and such world. But I remain skeptical of how you get there. And Murphy lodges a lot of moral arguments, and he says it would be anathema to libertarians, the creation of this system. Why do you think it wouldn't be do you want this system to happen?
Yes. in one word of 3 letters, yes. Let me do this. Let me tell you where I come from politically. That'll help people out if they understand this. In 1975, I realized I was a libertarian. I was reading some libertarian literature that my uncle happened to have gotten. And I think the Libertarian Party of the United States started in about 1973. This was 1975. And I realized I was always there. I had always been a libertarian. The literature didn't convince me I was there. But as I thought about it, I had to call myself what's called a minarchist libertarian. A minarchist is someone who thinks there's going to be or has to be a little bit of government. You can't entirely get rid of government. I couldn't figure out how to logically get rid of that tiny last little bit of government. So I was forced to call myself a minarchist libertarian, as opposed to an anarchist libertarian. Now, independently, therefore, I had come across a problem that a libertarian named David Friedman had come across, and he had written a book in 1973 called The Machinery of Freedom. Now, I was entirely unaware of David Friedman's existence until about 1996, or approximately that time frame. I didn't know he had written a book called The Machinery of Freedom. I didn't know that he had something called The Hard Problem. The hard problem is the difficulty is if you have a region, and I won't use the term nation or country because that implies government. If you have a region of people that are run in an anarchistic or a libertarian point of view, a way of running the system, how do you defend that region from other nations or from nations outside that might want to invade and take over? Well, he called that the hard problem. If that region cannot tax its own people to fill to fill up a military, then you would think that that region would simply be attacked eventually and subsumed back in the group of conventional nations. Well, totally independently realized that was the problem, and David Friedman did. He wrote his book about it. So for the next 20 years, out of the back of my mind was the idea that an anarchy simply would not work, because if you had a region that ran on anarchy, it would simply be defenseless. Well, it was in January of 1995, as I've already mentioned, that I was thinking of what is fundamentally a different related problem. And I realized that if you could anonymously donate money to get rid of government employees, that doesn't work for just one employee or 2 or 10 or 100. It'll work for any number. Not only that, it would work to get rid of governments in other locations. People in one nation would be able to get rid of the bad guys in another nation, and vice versa. And as a consequence, I realized that my assassination politics essay makes a stable anarchy possible. If somebody out there is a threatening country, then just threaten its leadership. If they happen to have nuclear weapons, say, if you're in control of that country's nuclear weapon, we're going to donate you to death. And there would have to be a big nuclear weapons dismantling party where everyone would prove that they did not have nuclear weapons. So this system would roll over all existing governments, and it would produce a anarchy. And unfortunately, the term anarchy has come to be somewhat equated with chaos, but my APSA turns anarchy into non-chaos. So I believe, in fact, that the AP idea is the only ethical solution. And the reason is this. I don't know if you're familiar with something called democide, DEMOCIDE. That's the concept of people who are killed by government. It's written up as an article in Wikipedia, as is just about everything else these days. It was invented by a guy named RJ Hummel, who I think the article estimates that 250 million people were killed by governments in the 20th century. Now, the guy who thought of the idea, Hummel, I don't think he wanted to include people that were killed in government or in wars started by government. But I don't think that's a logical position to take. If 250 million people were killed by governments in the 20th century, I say that's not ethical. That's wrong. Why is it that we should tolerate governments killing people? And of course, it isn't necessarily just the big governments that kill people, but small governments and even the somewhat free governments occasionally do things like that by causing wars to occur. So people like Murphy should accept the reality that government kills lots of people. And if there's a concept called an opportunity cost. If you have an option but you choose not to take it, that costs something. You have to not use that solution. Well, a person who is aware that governments killed 250 million people in the 20th century, they need to defend the idea that that system is ethical and acceptable. I propose getting rid of governments to make it impossible for governments to murder 250 million people. Now, I don't know what the figures are for the 21st century, but I'm not willing to give them the opportunity to kill 100 million people in a flash of a nuclear war. And that's one of the reasons why I invented the AP concept.
What you said is very interesting. I mean, the minarchist. I mean, I've heard of David Friedman. The Machinery Freedom, great book. That's actually how, to a certain extent, vis-a-vis Keith Preston, somewhat we heard about it, both of us, as well as Bob Murphy a while back. And as far as the demo side, of course, I mean, that's the Hummel's work, the number of death tolls. I mean, this relates back to Friedman's sort of consequentialists thinking. I mean, even other libertarians like a Walter Block or other anarcho-libertarians of the right wouldn't shy away from saying, one of the arguments is, this is one of Block's TP. One of the arguments is, the consequentialist argument. The state has killed more people than gangs. And as far as the minarchy versus anarchy thing, I do entirely see it as a problem. My only problem with it remains is that, and David Friedman would I think would argue that, and that it used to be a private law society, the production of law on the market. I mean, there's a difference between law and government, at least in David Friedman's understanding of it. When in a way, you could say this is just a feud system in a way. You just go out. They're already guilty of doing something wrong. And so this is just justice. But this seems like it doesn't really have much due process or anything like that. Now it is quick. But would like a lot of people who are innocent or just not liked or temporarily not liked end up on this list? I mean, someone could come up with a new idea, someone else, some other group likes. I'm well aware of the opportunity cost. I mean, the biggest cost of having a bad job, you can't have a better job. Opportunity costs are one of the biggest problems with taxes. But would more people wind up on the list than you want?
Okay, you've made a valid point, and let me get to it. But I want to, before we go on to that, let me point out I don't know what they'd call a relationship with David Friedman. I'm waiting someday for David Friedman to admit that I solved his hard problem for him. I thought he thought of the problem and he described it extremely well. I independently thought of the problem, but I wish he would come out and say, "Hey, Jim Bell actually described the solution for my hard problem with this assassination politics essay." Now, he's obviously a very intelligent person, but part of this back and forth with logic and debate is that eventually you acknowledge that somebody may have solved your problem, and I think I did for him. Now, you just made an excellent point about how this system is actually going to work. And part of the problem here is that because the cypherpunks debate or discussion was forged, it's not currently possible to go back and see how it was discussed. Let me point out, if hypothetically I ran the AP system, if I was like the AP czar, not that I would do that, no, I wouldn't, but hypothetically if they did, until the governments were all taken down, I would limit the people who could be named on the system to people who had provably violated the non-aggression principle of libertarianism. Now, I prefer the term non-initiation of force principle. The reason is simply that non-aggression principle sounds too much like pacifism to me. So the principle, if I were deciding who was going to be listed, I wouldn't be making the donations, of course, but if I would be limiting those donations to people who violated NAP. The problem is that's a fact choice or a fact determination. And in most civilized countries of the world, the people doing those decisions are called juries. And I would not want to put myself up as a juror or as the jury. So what I would say is, for the first year or two, when all the governments are being taken down, I would let anybody who works for government or worked for government potentially being named in this list. I would not automatically start listing other people. Why? Because there was no fact determination system in operation. Once the government started falling, or once they eventually fall, what would happen is there would be a series of privatized court systems. Now, I think this is probably heavily discussed, but I cannot claim I've participated or read most of this information. But imagine you had a court system, and it would probably look sort of like an existing court system. And someone would be able to bring a charge against somebody else saying that you've violated the non-aggression principle. The person who is accused may very well be quite guilty, but one of the reasons why he may want to participate, and by the way, participation in this privatized court system will be voluntary. You don't have to show up. But the reason they might want to show up is perhaps they think that they are not as guilty as it was being described. So they would have a choice, either participate in this court system or potentially just be targeted by an AP hit. I think most people would prefer to go through a court system which would eventually have something known as a jury, and the jurors will be deciding whether or not the person accused is guilty. Of course, he might have other complaints against the person doing the accusation. So anyway, it would be a privatized court system. It would not necessarily have to have anything to do with an AP organization. But again, hypothetically, if I ran the AP organization, for the first couple years, I'd say I'm not going to allow donations against anybody except government employees, because I define a government employee as a person who engaged in a threatening gang of extortionists, so that they're going to be named. When eventually the governments fall, court systems start up, people start having the ability to take complaints to a jury. At that point, if I was running the AP system, I would say, okay, you have to have a verdict by one of these privatized court systems. And if you do, and if they do not cooperate, if they do not satisfy the verdict, then yes, I will accept donations against the defendant. And the system will have, in some sense, many of the characteristics of existing courts. Hopefully the best aspects, and hopefully not the worst. But as a consequence, again, if I ran the AP system, I wouldn't just accept a donation on some random individual who was just alleged to have done something wrong. But let me add to that. There wouldn't necessarily be just one AP operation. In fact, the whole concept of competition is that if you have no competition in business, you tend to produce poor service, high prices. Well, if I hypothetically ran an AP system, somebody else down the street, he might run another AP system, and he might have his own rules. There might hypothetically be an AP system out there that's run by somebody who is not nearly as scrupulous as I or others who operated a system to be. He might accept donations on just about anybody. However, I happen to believe that it would be far more expensive to purchase a hit from that person than from me. Why? Well, the people out there who are potentially collecting these rewards would probably prefer if they knew that their target was going to be actually guilty and worthy of being killed. There would potentially be hitmen who would work for an unethical AP operation, but they would, because there's probably less competition, they could command much, much higher prices. So it would probably be much more economical to purchase a hit on somebody who deserves it than somebody who doesn't deserve it. So, and I went through all these discussions with myself in January of 1995. I decided that the system would end up working out fairly well. A lot of I think the term used, parade of horribles that a lot of people can think about probably won't happen if the AP system is paired with privatized court systems. Effectively, it would allow their people to actually address these disputes in court. So that's why I feel fairly confident, and I have for the last 25 years, the system will work out a lot better than a lot of fearful people are afraid it might.
Scott Alexander, the guy who ran the Star Slater Codex forum, popular blogger who actually attempted to be doxxed by New York Times, once commented on, I think that was him, that he wanted to be if David Friedman's system was ever tried, he wanted to be very far away from it. I'm not sure if I would necessarily agree or disagree with this. I mean, if you get into the weeds of some of the anarchist-monarchist debates, it's sometimes very easy to lose the plot, and David Friedman has participated in a number of them. And one of the comments David Friedman makes is most people are conservative. It's worth pointing out that, assassination calls already take place. Again, as I pointed out earlier, I mean, the Obama and Hillary Clinton administration basically executed Gaddafi in Libya. Now it's basically the kind of bad anarchy there, slave markets and so forth. I mean, so again, I'm going to stress by consequential terms. I think the state is the most dangerous gang. The most dangerous gang around. But one final thing, I'll probably just pass it to Swithin for his questions or comments, is one of the things I think Murphy, and I, to a large extent, agree with him. We've had Walter Block on about reparations regarding the NAP. He'll say some interesting things. But Murphy's a Calvinist, and I bring that up for one reason. A Calvinist is a Christian who basically believes everyone is guilty. It basically, the Bible says, "He who has not be the first to throw the first stone, who has not sinned." So one of the things I think Murphy is concerned is, and I can see that, I can sort of see that in his writing. I mean, Murphy's a very intelligent guy, and Calvinists are extremely intelligent. I do think Murphy is, the problem with, there's a statement, justice will make, the world blind or something like that. Your system as a solution to David Friedman problem is interesting, because in a way it's just a private court system. I mean, at the end of the day, the punishment of a court system is you're either gonna execute someone or put them in jail. Since jail is expensive to do, and since it's hard to get reparations, in a way the state already does it. But I'm gonna pass it for Swithin if he has any comments or statements, questions, Swithin.
Jim, do you see AP as the sole way to achieve sort of libertarian anarchy, or do you see it as complementary to other methods? And if so, what's kind of the broad proportions of those?
Well, I'm not really aware of any other method that would actually work. I have the experience of having been a minarchist libertarian for 20 years, but there was no obvious way of getting to libertarianism. America has what is primarily a two-party system, and there's a reason that it is a two-party system. There was the way, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called a first past the post election system. It's very hard for a third party to exist. Now, the Libertarian Party is doing rather well given that restriction, but I've never seen a mechanism described that will get to a libertarian society because the people who currently control it control it so tightly. I don't know. What's the competition? If there is a competition, I can't recall having heard about it. Now, admittedly, I don't claim to read a lot of this literature that's out there, but how would you do it? How would you get to that if it wasn't through AP? AP has the advantage, and believe me, I've had 25 years to think about it, that you don't have to have 51% of the people to agree it's a good system to make it work. If you only had 1% of the population think to themselves, we don't like the kind of system of government that currently exists, then it would only take 1% or possibly even much less to take down all the governments on the face of the earth. And not just take them down and replace them with something else, take them down permanently. Because that's one reason why revolutions hardly ever produce better government than they started out with. Because in order to take down a government, you pretty much have to find some other organization that's at least as powerful. And the people who run that powerful organization eventually get greedy and they want to take control, and they don't release power to they've taken over. What can I say? But I have just simply never heard of a better solution. We are at crossroads. When I wrote my AP essay in 1995, it was actually, comparatively speaking, a very peaceful political society, okay, in America and other places around the world. We have recently, at least in America, turned into this hotbed, this cauldron of dispute and fighting that's almost made to induce people to want to implement an AP-like system. Everybody in America today, it seems, hates their opponent. They didn't hate their opponent back in 1995, but it's hate right now all the time, 24 hours a day.
What was behind the question was I was wondering what your conception of what the state actually is. From what I've read of your work and talking with you, my guess would be you treat the state as primarily sort of an organized gang, whereas I I would probably make the case that there's a much more sort of ideological content to its legitimacy than merely its power. So I think AP in principle could, if it worked, got rid of a lot of its mechanics to cause harm to people with violence. But I don't know if you get rid of the idea of the state, or certainly an idea of something that wasn't libertarian anarchism, which would just keep reappearing unless you were to somehow alter the prevailing orthodoxy amongst the population.
Well, I guess my answer to that is if something reappears that actually begins to threaten people, violation of the NAP, a violation of the NAP, it can be struck down just as readily when it appears. I don't know how something could appear, because if any substantial number of people feel threatened by that new thing, then the people who feel threatened could simply donate to see that threatener goes away. If, for example, a country started to be formed halfway around the world that runs in a more conventional tax and generate a military system, then the people of every region would feel threatened by that if there was a reasonable probability that their country could get overrun. So they would have a good reason to want to get rid of any leadership in this foreign country, foreign region that starts acting in a threatening fashion. There's an old saying, an armed society is a polite society. I realize that you from Britain may not be the ideal ones to understand this, but I say that an AP society is an extremely polite society. Threatening in an AP society is fatal to the threatener.
A very different question. Do you think that cryptocurrency, which is going to be a form of it, would be the basis of this system? Without it, it wouldn't work. Do you think it will ever be would be adopted on a wide enough basis? At present, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies don't really seem to be used as money, at least not primarily. They seem to be primarily at present be used as as an asset more than a money as such, which you probably need it to be to make the system work. Do you think that crypto would become widely accepted, and if so, why?
I think it will be. Right now, as I think you suggest, it's more currently a store of value than anything else. Not necessarily speculation, but it is a store of value. I'll just raise an issue here. Mexicans who come to America who work can send money back to their families, but they usually get charged a few percent for that. If they go through Bitcoin, they bypass that cost. That's an example of how Bitcoin and other digital currencies can, in effect, get around existing controls and limitations. I am quite confident that digital cash will get even more and more relevant and big in the next few years. Bitcoin has a characteristic that it isn't entirely anonymous. If everybody's bank account was published, but with their name not on the bank account, that's the way Bitcoin currently is. And you would speculate on, does that particular account belong to a particular person? Well, so it's not, and if you pay money to somebody, in principle, you can look at the ledgers and you know who you spent the money to, even if you never met them, even if you don't know their name. Again, Bitcoin has never been truly anonymous. Now, there are some coins out there. There's a modification of Bitcoin called Zerocoin, which is a way of actually anonymizing Bitcoin. A Zerocoin-like coin would be appropriate for an AP type system where there's no even theoretical ability to trace down who spent what. I think this is going to happen. Bitcoin or digital cashes have only been really used as for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. I mean, there were obviously a little bit of work back in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, but it's only been really in the last 6 or 7 years that they've come into existence. And there's probably, there have been some fake AP type systems. There was one back in 2013, run by a guy named Sanjuro. I don't know where that came from or where it went to, but I don't think it ended up doing anything, how shall I say, useful. But it'll happen. And I did want to put in a plug. There's a book called Bounty by Michael Burns, spelled Byrnes, which was a fictionalized AP. I read it. It's a good book. I think there was a Black Mirror episode. I don't know if there was season 3, episode 6 that worked on the AP concept to some degree. What can I say? I'm working technologically. I'm working on entirely different things right now, but you'll hear a lot more about me, but not in the concept of the AP idea, or certainly not only that. So, what can I say?
I would agree, yeah, that we've only had crypto really for the last 5-6 years. And so, yes, I think it potentially could go big. I think there are 2 problems with it fundamentally, which might be a problem for large-scale take-up. One is currently the state's demand for taxation being in dollars or whatever jurisdiction you happen to be in. This was a problem that Murray Rothbard tried to confront when attempting plans to return to gold, for example. And secondly, I think possibly more importantly, I think that crypto, whilst it is a store of value at present, I think crypto would probably end up having a rather volatile price, which might make it difficult for being traded, because the only reason that you would use crypto would be for exchange purposes. There is no sort of non-exchange, no sort of use value to it, unlike, say, commodities. So there's always, even if, say, copper ceased to be traded as a currency, it would still have a residual value in industrial capacities, and so the price wouldn't go to zero. This is why you would expect, say, the government, the dollar, for example, to go to zero in the absence of, say, legal tender laws and government mandated taxes to be collected in dollars. So those would be my 2 reasons why you might consider me a crypto skeptic. Do you have any responses to those?
Well, the advantages of being able to spend money remotely, people that never have met each other, for example, is too important to totally get rid of the idea of digital currencies. Now, we are all familiar with the idea of pulling out paper out of our wallets and handing it to people to buy things. It's been made very convenient. To the extent that Bitcoin is not particularly convenient, it's because it hasn't been integrated into our societies as a easy and straightforward way of paying people. That will change. That to some extent that is already changing, but the change is slow. People have to get used to the idea of being able to do that. There was a time when in this world where credit cards didn't really exist. I think credit cards may have come about, if I'm not sure, I think it's about the 1960s, if I'm not familiar. I think they eventually, became adopted, but it took a while. The idea of having a debit card, again, I don't know when that came into existence, but eventually it had to be adopted. People don't change their systems as rapidly as a technologist might hope or that it would. What can I say? People are fundamentally conservative in that sense. They don't feel comfortable with technology until it's been around for a while. It'll happen. It'll happen. I think. I think the people who are confident about digital cash are the ones that have decided that it's going to work, and they're full in. Yeah, I don't criticize people who are doubters, but I think it could only go but up, not down at this point.
The best defense of cryptocurrency to me is that, or just privatized currency, not calling it cryptocurrency, because banks used to have their own banknotes and so forth. I mean, and the state just happened to develop a monopoly on it. The best defense is that the currency is only stable because the state is. Someone once asked Nassim Taleb that question. He's a great thinker. He once asked that question, I think Taleb's idea is basically the army at the end of the day backs up, the central banks. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the 16 aircraft carriers. And if you look at the origins of the IMF and the GATT and all these organizations, it's the British Navy and the American Navy that backs up the currency. I mean, whether or not, and the state, I would say, is the biggest threat to getting it off the ground in that regard. So I'm not. The technology, I think, works because, as was stated with credit cards, many older people here are still suspicious of credit cards, and my suspicion is that people used to be suspicious of currency. There's the Bitcoin pizza, the famous pizza. It's like 1,000 Bitcoins or something like that.
10,000.
So yeah, that's a huge event. Again, the biggest upside to me, and I think most right Austrian theoretical historians would agree with this, the biggest upside is you cannot fight a war like World War I without central banks and without taxation. You cannot fight war like U.S. Civil War without central banks and taxation. So again, back to the sort of the moral argument for the system. Without, and in fact, there's many of them. I guess the only fear is there only ends up one, and then that could be a tyrannical system. Although that would hopefully fall down. But that is a sort of Black Mirror scenario. And your system is in a way just like a bounty system which already exists or used to exist in the not so wild West. So yeah, in some ways your system is not that old. But I do think it is interesting. And does it solve David Friedman's hard question? I'm not sure. I do think there's a way in which it just leads to the French Committee of Public Safety. I do think there is a huge trap door that it just leads to that. But if you have any final comments, that'd be great, and Swithin can have any final comments, and we'll get going.
Okay. Okay. I think people should have up to now discussed the the concept of the AP system a lot more than up to now they have, particularly people who might classify themselves as anarchists. Unfortunately, while I call myself an anarchist, I find that the large majority of people who do call themselves anarchists are actually just big government-loving leftists who want a big government to attack their enemies. They don't actually want no government. What can I say? That's just the way it typically is. Anarcho-capitalists are different, but people are afraid that it'll turn into crony capitalism, which infests the current systems today. I thought of the idea AP, what I consider for the best reasons. I wanted to have government stop murdering 250 million people per century. I wanted a system that would be able to shut down abusive governments. Nobody else seems to have proposed a system that would allow that to happen, and I would really like to see that happen. Still, despite everything that's happened to me, can we have a discussion about who is going to be running, not just I'm not talking to individuals, but are we going to get away from this concept of government running the world? It hasn't done very well in the past, and I don't think it's going to get much better, much faster.
Thank you for your time, Jim. That was an interesting discussion. I'd just like to now thank everyone for listening. And if you've enjoyed this show, please subscribe to us on YouTube, Podbean, or Spotify. The more subscribers we get, the higher we get up in the rankings, and more people can enjoy the show as you did. And if you would like to get in contact with us with ideas for the show, please contact us at mindcrimeliberty@gmail.com. That's mindcrime libertyshow@gmail.com.